Picture this. Above you, far beyond anything you can see, satellites are already moving. Some pass every 90 minutes. Some stay fixed over the same patch of Earth, staring without blinking. They are always there, always watching, always recording. By every intuitive measure, this should be enough. Now, picture something else. A single aircraft climbs slowly into the upper atmosphere. It does not rush. It does not sprint toward a target. It does not arrive, strike, and leave. Instead, it stays. Hours pass. The sky below it changes color. The ground beneath it shifts from morning to afternoon, and still it stays. This is not a relic being kept alive for nostalgia. This is not a museum piece flying ceremonial laps. It is a system that planners still choose to put in the air, in a world already surrounded by space-based sensors. That choice is the part that should feel strange. Most people assume that once observation becomes global, local presence loses its value. If something can be seen from orbit, then being physically above a specific place should no longer matter. Coverage replaces presence. Persistence replaces proximity. Automation replaces people. That logic feels clean, efficient, modern, and yet the aircraft is still there. Not everywhere, not all the time, but deliberately, repeatedly, in situations where its existence seems unnecessary, until you notice that it keeps being used anyway. The contradiction does not come from what the aircraft can do, it comes from when it is used. If satellites truly solved the problem of observation in a final, universal way, there would be no reason to accept the constraints that come with keeping a human crew in the sky. There would be no reason to plan around endurance limits, airspace access, weather windows, or the friction of maintaining something that must physically remain aloft. Those are not modern advantages. They are liabilities, and yet decision makers continue to accept them. Consider the rhythm of satellites. They move whether you need them or not. Their paths are predictable. Their schedules are set long before events unfold on the ground. They provide scale. They provide reach. They provide continuity across the globe. But they do not pause. They do not wait. They pass overhead, collect what they are designed to collect, and move on. Now contrast that with an aircraft that can remain over the same region, adjust its position gradually, and stay aligned with what is unfolding below, not just geographically, but temporally. This difference is not about resolution, it is not about classification, it is not about who has better sensors, it is about something subtler. When events develop slowly, satellites work beautifully. When conditions change on a schedule, satellites are ideal, but some situations do not evolve on orbital time. They stretch, they stall, they linger in uncertain states. They do not demand a snapshot, they demand attention. And attention in complex systems is not the same as coverage. The presence of a crewed aircraft changes how time is handled. It can stay when nothing happens. It can remain when outcomes are unclear. It can continue to observe without the implicit pressure to move on to the next pass. That choice, to remain instead of cycle, carries consequences. It requires logistics. It requires planning. It requires accepting vulnerability that automated systems were supposed to eliminate. Those costs only make sense if something important is gained in return. Yet that something is rarely articulated in public discussions. Instead, the conversation stays stuck on a simpler question. Why hasn't this been replaced yet? That question assumes replacement is the natural outcome of progress. It assumes newer systems erase older ones. That broader coverage makes localized presence obsolete. But the continued use of this aircraft suggests a different pattern. Not that satellites failed. Not that aircraft are superior, but that the problem space never collapsed into a single dimension. In theory, a satellite can see more. In practice, seeing more does not always mean seeing what matters. A system that is always present everywhere can still struggle with situations that require sustained focus in one place. That is not a technical limitation, it is a structural one. The aircraft's role does not expand because satellites are weak. It persists because certain decisions still depend on something satellites are not designed to provide by default. That dependency is not advertised. It is not framed as doctrine. It shows up quietly in deployment patterns and operational choices. The aircraft appears, stays longer than expected, and leaves only after the situation below has fully resolved or refused to. From the outside, this can look inefficient. Why commit an asset that must be protected, fueled, scheduled, and recovered when machines in orbit never land at all? That question sounds reasonable, until you realize it assumes observation is only about data collection. In reality, observation is also about alignment with unfolding time. Satellites excel at being everywhere. The aircraft excels at being somewhere. That distinction feels trivial until you notice how often critical decisions depend on the second, not the first. The uncomfortable implication is not that modern systems are incomplete. It is that older assumptions about what complete coverage means may no longer hold. If global visibility truly replaced the need for sustained local presence, there would be no reason to keep making this choice, and yet the choice keeps being made. This is where the old intuition begins to strain. The idea that once you can see everything, you no longer need to stay anywhere. The world did not simplify the way that intuition expected. It became more observable and more dependent on how observation is sustained over time. The aircraft is not an exception to the satellite age. It is a reminder that the satellite age did not eliminate certain constraints. It rearranged them. And in that rearrangement, being present, physically, continuously, deliberately, did not disappear. It simply stopped being obvious. The persistence of this aircraft forces an uncomfortable pause, not because it contradicts satellites, but because it exposes an assumption we rarely question. That assumption is simple. Once observation becomes continuous and global, local, sustained presence should lose relevance, yet the operational reality keeps pushing back. Look at how decisions are actually made. They are rarely triggered by a single image. They are rarely resolved by one clean data point. Instead, they unfold through prolonged uncertainty. Hours where nothing decisive happens. Days where indicators shift subtly. Moments where the absence of change matters as much as change itself. These are not moments that demand more coverage. They demand patience. Patience is not a technical feature. It cannot be scheduled in advance. It cannot be optimized globally. It must be held, and holding attention over time, in one place, creates pressures that global systems are not designed to absorb gracefully. This is where the presence of a crewed aircraft begins to feel less like redundancy and more like friction that refuses to disappear. It forces planners to commit early, to stay committed longer than expected, to accept that observation is not always a passive act. Staying aloft is a decision that keeps being reaffirmed hour by hour. That reaffirmation matters. A satellite pass is indifferent. It will come whether conditions are stable or chaotic, whether the situation below is resolving or stalling. Its strength is consistency. Its weakness is indifference to context. An aircraft that remains overhead does not have that luxury. Its continued presence signals that the situation below has not yet closed. This difference rarely shows up in public explanations. Instead, it hides in patterns. Flights that last longer than anticipated, orbits that tighten rather than expand, assets that remain deployed after their initial task appears complete. None of these behaviors make sense if observation is treated as a one-time collection problem. They make sense only if observation is also a way of staying synchronized with uncertainty. From a distance, the satellite era looks decisive. Coverage maps fill in, gaps disappear, blind spots shrink, but decisiveness at the system level does not always translate to decisiveness at the moment of choice. That gap is where older assumptions begin to fail quietly. The aircraft does not solve that gap. It does not close it. It simply occupies it, and by doing so, it reveals that the gap still exists. If the satellite age had truly eliminated the need for sustained local presence, this aircraft would have become irrelevant long ago. Not ceremonially retired, not quietly maintained, irrelevant. Instead, it continues to appear exactly where the intuition says it should not be needed. This is not because technology stalled, it is because complexity did not collapse in the way many expected. Seeing everything did not remove the need to stay with something, it amplified it. The question this raises is not about platforms. It is about how modern systems behave under prolonged ambiguity, when outcomes are delayed, when signals conflict, when resolution refuses to arrive on schedule. In those moments, global awareness does not replace local endurance, it leans on it. The aircraft's continued relevance is not a failure of space-based systems. It is a stress mark on an assumption, the assumption that progress always reduces the value of staying. Nothing about this is dramatic. There is no sudden revelation, no moment where the old logic clearly breaks. It simply bends, repeatedly, under operational choices that keep being made. Choices that suggest something about observation has not changed as cleanly as expected. The sky is already full, and yet someone still decides to keep an aircraft there. That decision is quiet, but it is persistent. And persistence in complex systems is rarely accidental. What makes this persistence uncomfortable is that it cannot be explained away as inertia. Systems do not keep paying costs unless those costs are doing real work. Fuel, crews, airspace coordination, maintenance cycles. None of these exist by accident. If the aircraft were merely a leftover habit, it would be the first thing to disappear under pressure. Instead, it survives precisely in situations where pressure is highest. There is a subtle shift that happens when observation must remain present over time. Responsibility accumulates. When a system passes overhead and leaves, it does not carry the burden of waiting. When a system stays, it inherits the uncertainty below it. Hour by hour, the question is no longer, what did we see, but do we keep watching? That is not a neutral question. Keeping an aircraft aloft is not just an operational act. It is a signal to everyone involved that the situation is still open, not resolved, not closed, not safely categorized. As long as it remains overhead, no one can claim that the moment has passed. This is where the old intuition quietly struggles. The intuition assumes that better visibility leads naturally to faster closure, that once you can see everything, decisions become easier, outcomes more decisive. But prolonged presence does the opposite. It stretches the decision space. It keeps ambiguity alive longer than many systems are comfortable with. Satellites compress time. They turn observation into intervals, discrete passes, predictable windows. That structure is powerful, but it also nudges decisions toward snapshots, toward moments that can be cleanly framed. An aircraft that stays refuses that framing. It forces continuity where snapshots would be easier. It keeps the situation unresolved even when there is pressure to move on. That friction is not a flaw. It is a different way of handling uncertainty. This is why replacement never fully happens, not because satellites lack capability, but because replacement assumes that uncertainty can be processed in advance, that all relevant moments can be scheduled, that ambiguity follows predictable rhythms. In practice, it does not. Some situations unfold slowly, then refuse to conclude. They hover in states that are neither escalation nor resolution. They demand attention without offering clarity. Global systems can observe these states, but staying with them is a different commitment. The aircraft's endurance is not about staying airborne. It is about staying engaged when nothing decisive happens. That kind of engagement does not scale well. It resists automation. It resists optimization. And that resistance is precisely why it remains rare and valuable. From the outside, it may look inefficient. Why dedicate so much effort to watching something that refuses to resolve? But inefficiency in complex systems often marks the boundary between observation and responsibility. As long as the aircraft remains overhead, someone is actively choosing not to disengage. That choice matters. It shapes how long uncertainty is tolerated, how much ambiguity is allowed to persist, how pressure builds or is delayed. These effects are invisible in coverage maps. They only appear over time. This is why the presence feels out of place in an age defined by global reach, not because it contradicts modern systems, but because it exposes a limit in how far reach can substitute for staying. The sky may already be full, but fullness does not guarantee patience, and patience, once required, still has to come from somewhere. At this point, the old intuition is no longer comfortable, not disproven, not overturned, just unable to explain why this choice keeps repeating. Why, in a world saturated with observation, someone still insists on remaining.